seminar in nutrition and dietetics, food, power, and obesity, an African lens. We're truly pleased to have you joining us for what promises to be an important and thought-provoking conversation. Obesity is often framed as an issue of individual responsibility, but across African contexts, we know the story is far more complex. Food choices are shaped by social realities, economic constraints, political systems, and deeply rooted inequalities. Tonight, we'll critically explore the power dynamics within food production and distribution, reflect on how inequality influences dietary patterns, and examine what culturally relevant, community-informed, and sustainable approaches to obesity prevention truly look like. As healthcare professionals and leaders, our role extends beyond the clinic. It includes advocacy, contextual understanding, and meaningful engagement with the communities we serve. Thank you for being part of this conversation. Let's begin.
Hey, Dr. Tatu. I see you there. You see yourself on the screen, you are like, Khotong. welcome, colleagues. I hope you are well. This is the Clinical Care
Recording in
Platform,
progress.
your home for continuing professional development. And let me tell you what, today I am fully armed. I am not alone, and I'm not going to spoil the show and make it, my own show. Firstly, I am with Dr. Rochelle there. Hello, Rochelle. Woo! And I'm also with...
Hi, evening, Lesego, evening, colleagues.
Yes, and I'm also with our dearest Mpho Chukudu. She's back home. Welcome, Mpho. Awesome. Yeah, so I'm just here to hand over to Dr. Rochelle. She's not going to talk about PrEP and Lenacapavir tonight. She's just going to be one of our hosts, and I'm going to co-host with her. And yeah, let me not waste a lot of time and just hand over to Dr. Rochelle Adams. Rochelle, thank you so much. I can't wait to collaborate with you on today's session. I mean, tonight's session, and I know that it's going to be an awesome one. Yeah, let me hand over to you. Thank you so much.
Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome. Welcome. Thank you so much, Lesego, for inviting me to co-host with you tonight. Tonight's our first evening webinar for the month of March, and I'm really, really honored to be here. And colleagues, today tonight's topic for me is something that I'm really interested in both a personal and also for professional reasons. Hello, Mpho. You don't want to say welcome to you as our speaker. You know, you've got one eager person here waiting to truly hear what you have to say to us tonight. And I really want to thank you. And colleagues, tonight, even as we have this jam-packed session tonight, we're talking about food, power, and obesity through an African lens. I don't know how many of you know that tonight is World Obesity Day around the world. It's an annual global health awareness day aimed at raising awareness of obesity as a major public health issue, and also about promoting strategies to prevent and treat it. It specifically looks to highlight factors such as diet, physical activity, food environments, and the systemic influences on our weight and our health. For those of you who may not know, South Africa is truly facing a growing obesity crisis, where we've got more than 2/3 of our adult women and nearly 1/3 of our adult males who are actually either overweight or obese. And as you can imagine, this is placing millions of South Africans at an increased risk of non-communicable diseases like hypertension, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and certain cancers. So in our context, though, we know that we've got rapid urbanization, we know that we've got food systems transformation, and I'm really, really looking forward to this topic tonight, where we will examine the intersection of food, power, economics, and health. And Mpho tonight is going to explore the complex social, economic, and political forces that are shaping dietary patterns and obesity across our African continents. The webinar tonight will encourage us as healthcare providers to critically reflect on the power dynamics within food production and distribution, and the impact of inequality on nutrition, and the role of healthcare professionals in advocating for culturally relevant, community informed, and sustainable approaches to preventing and managing obesity across diverse African settings. So tonight, our discussion invites us to move beyond blame, consider the broader systems that are shaping the health outcomes. Tonight, it is my honor and my privilege to introduce Mpho Chukuri to you tonight, a registered dietitian with a special interest in integrative and functional nutrition. She holds a BSc in dietetics and a postgraduate diploma in hospital dietetics from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, as well as a master's in food culture, communication, and marketing from the University of Gastronomic Sciences. Her work centers on reclaiming ancient indigenous knowledge and connecting traditional African foods with contemporary nutritional science. Through speaking, education, and consulting, she collaborates with individuals and producers to shape food systems. I'm particularly interested in these books that she's written. So she's co-authored of Eating, Lose Weight, Gain Health, and Find Yourself in 2016, which was the winner of the South African Gourmand World Cookbook Award in the health and nutrition category. This book blends Southern African food traditions, modern nutritional science, and social insight to support health and self-discovery. And I love this, through pleasurable, heritage-rich cooking. Her latest book, which I think I'm really also gonna love, is Your Health Begins in Your Gut. It is a practical guide to using food, stress management, sleep, and movement to support gut and overall health. Colleagues, I learned a new word today, ecogastronome, because Mpho is an ecogastronome, which describes someone who uses food as a bridge between health, culture, and the environment. So, colleagues, please, can we have hearts? Can we have roses? Can we have lots of love for Mpho as she presents to us today?
Vuvuzela is in the house. Yes, welcome, Paul. I think you can share your screen. Look at all the hearts you are getting there. I'm so jealous.
I gave Imelda. Good
Yes.
evening, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me. I am so honored.
Okay.
Thank you for the introduction. I could have let you continue because it seems like you know what I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to be negative. You know, there's a positive side, but we need to talk about things. Yeah.
Would you like Imelda to share your slides on your
Yes,
behalf?
please share it. Because,
Okay.
yeah. Please share it.
Hi, Imelda.
Dr. Moda, you do have the slides. If you can check from your side, my apologies. You can then present so that it's smoothly flow. Just
Sweet.
let me know. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, let me just do something. I was not aware that I'm going to have to share from my side. Abby?
Me too.
No.
Me too. Let me look for them.
Let me do this.
Good evening and welcome to our
Yeah, I see colleagues are also happy. There's a Zipo in the comment section saying they consulted with them point 2023. So
Yeah.
it's an exciting night, eh?
I found them. Dr. Mawela,
Dr. Lesego,
uploaded them.
Oh, okay.
Lesego, we do have the
Okay, that's
slides.
fine. I was like, okay. I was not, okay. Thank you so much. I think we can go from here. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much for the introduction and for inviting me. Good evening, everybody. So my interest in food, yes, started with nutrition. But as time went on, I realized that I'm interested in other powers that shape what we have on our plates. Because when I'm very greedy, so I like looking at people's plates and I'm very nosy. And I can look at your plate and actually say to you, I know how you're feeling. I can understand the forces that are affecting what's on your plate. I understand what is your mood, and we can have a conversations from there. That led me to write my first book, Eating. So ting, for those who don't know Setswana, it is fermented sorghum porridge, which is high in probiotics. It's easy to digest, and it's all the rage with everybody wanting to ferment. And also then I went to study a master's in food culture, and it widened my view on food, that it's not only about nutrition. Majority of people who, when they choose food, they don't think I'm going to look for vitamin C, I want calcium, and I want protein. People eat food based on what's available, what's their mood, and also what they can afford, and also sometimes it's cravings and wanting to connect with somebody else, or if you live far away from home, you tend to crave foods that taste like home, so that the longing from home is not as bad as if you didn't have the food. So those are things that interest me. I'm also interested in why are other diets more superior? Why do we tend to value foods that Western versus what we have at home? And these are discussions that I like having. So we're going to talk about food, power, obesity. And I think a few days ago, I decided to narrow the topic because it was too long to only include the South African lens. It's also interesting, you know, it's much more interesting that it's our country, but the other thing is that we are the most developed country in Africa, and especially also even if you look at Southern Africa like Zambia, Botswana, Namibia, Swaziland, we tend to eat similar foods, but we have more, or we are the ones that have transitioned to a more Western diet. So this topic actually, if you keep it only in South Africa, it tends to become more relevant. So we'll touch on the South African obesity statistics, which most of us are aware of, looking at indigenous heritage food. And when I say indigenous, I'm also including heritage. So indigenous is what comes from Africa, and heritage is foods that has been here for generations. So it's naturalized. Looking at what land climate action and erosion are affecting our foods, the economic structures. We'll look at different food policies and how trade and power affect how we choose the food. And also the global nutrition hierarchies, why are other diets more promoted than others, and what we can do as clinicians in South Africa to protect the diets that our heritage diets, and how we can apply that into practice. So I want to introduce you to Lerato. She's 42 years old. She's raised in rural Limpopo. She currently now lives in Diepsloot because she came here for work. She works far away from home, that she takes 2 taxis to get to work. She mainly shops at the Spaza shop because it's more convenient and it's sometimes more cheaper than buying at a supermarket that is so far and also requires her to buy in bulk. Her diet mainly consists of pap, white bread, polony, 2-minute noodles, achas, and chips. And clinically, she is obese. She has type 2 diabetes and also complains of heartburn. When you are looking at Lerato as a clinician, what story are you telling yourself about how she gets here? Can give you a moment to think about it and consider what you're going to tell her and how you're going to view her medical condition, and also the type of food that she chooses. Is it her, or is it the society and the systems that are forcing her to eat what she chooses to eat? The first section is the South African obesity landscape. The numbers don't look good. About 68% of women in South Africa are overweight or obese, and about 31%, which is a third of men, are obese or overweight. And the sad thing is that the Black female South Africans are the ones that are highly affected by obesity and being overweight. And also we know that non-communicable diseases like diabetes, high blood pressure, some of the cancers are the second leading cause of death nationally. But we also see the paradox that about 27% of the children under 5 years in South Africa are stunted. And sometimes you find these stunted children in the household where the adult is obese. So we tend to look at them like the mother is eating too kind of foods they are eating. They may be, the child may, yes, be getting enough, not getting enough nutrients and also micronutrients and nutrients, but the mother, yes, is eating too much, but also her diet quality doesn't mean that it is, the best. And what does this tell us? It tells us that the burden of Black South Africans carry the highest burden of obesity and being overweight in South Africa. Most of them are in the urban areas, but we do see that rural women's rates of obesity and being overweight is also increasing. And also the sad thing is that most of them are from a lower economic status. So, looking at in the past, the women in the rural areas were the ones that were eating much more healthier and they were much more active. But we're seeing that they are without moving from the rural areas, their diet is transitioning to be ultra processed. And this means that we see the stunted child and obese mother in the same household. We also see that there's the overweight and obese parents also have type 2 diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease. And sadly, you also see these conditions in children. Children are not only stunted, some of the children we are seeing increasing rates of childhood obesity. And this, I also noticed that we are not responding sufficiently when it comes to policy and also the nutrition, the clinical response. Let's look at what South Africans used to eat before we adopted a diet that is ultra-processed and more Western. The book from Bryant, which was written in 1907, shows that mainly in KZN, the people were in the rural areas. Obviously, they were surviving with about more than 55 different types of vegetables. They had 7 different types of sorghum. They had 5 different types of maize meal. And this is not the maize meal that we have in the store that is white, like a white shirt. This is the maize meal with different colors, the purple, the blue, the red, the yellow, and the greenish maize meal that is high in antioxidants and fiber. They also had about 25 different foraged wild herbs, which are high in micronutrients and polyphenols. He also noted that people had about 10 distinct brewing methods. So they were fermenting, and when you ferment, remember that it changes the taste of the food, it improves the nutrition, the proteins and the micronutrients are easily absorbed, and also it improves the microbial diversity, meaning that it improves gut health. It also improves the way that you digest your food. It improves how you respond to carbohydrates and also cholesterol, among other benefits of a good gut health. With this evidence, it shows that people relatively had a good nutritional status pre-colonization. But I'm not saying that things were perfect, because we do understand that there were times of stress where there was drought. There were times where people didn't have food. There were times where there were diseases that affected the animals and the plants. There were cases of locust infestation, which affected the agricultural output. So things were not perfect, but most of the time they had better quality of food. This wisdom that we have lost is due to the policies that have been applied since colonialism and apartheid, and even today with the new government that's supposed to free us. And it's not that people were being ignorant. Yes, there is that little part, but most of the time is the structures that were put to make sure that we don't benefit from these foods that are very healthy. Some of the foods that were eaten during the time were sorghum and millet. Sorghum and millet originate from Africa for more than 8,000 years ago. And we know that they have a lower glycemic index than maize meal. So if you have diabetes, if you want to control your blood glucose level or want to be fuller for longer, then you would benefit from eating sorghum and millet. They're high in fibers, minerals, and vitamins, especially when you ferment them. They're also high in phytonutrients. That some of the studies have found that red sorghum has more antioxidants, more phytonutrients than the famous blueberries that we like paying hundreds of rands for. So if you have your sorghum, you're better than somebody who's spending money on blueberries. If you ferment it into ding, it's easier to digest, which is the traditional ways of eating them. In Botswana and Zambia and Zimbabwe, they are still eating a lot of millet and they're fermenting it. And modern ways, like what I do in my work with my books, that I make sorghum and millets into salads, I bake with them, and industrially, especially in America, they make mold out of sorghum, and they make sorghum sugar. So you can make quite a lot of things with sorghum and millet. The beautiful thing is that sorghum is drought tolerant, because South Africa is a very dry country. We waste a lot of water because of infrastructure and also personal use, but we're not a country that is supposed to be planting food like maize that requires quite a lot of water for it to be grown. Sorghum will grow easily when there is no water. Also, when there's high amounts of rain, sorghum will survive, and also millet. The second category of what is available, what used to be available and also available now, is amadumbe. Amadumbe is taro, also sweet potatoes and wild yam. These root vegetables. Amadumbe has that mucilage, so it has that mucus thing that a lot of people, especially if you didn't grow up in KZN and in Eastern Cape, don't like. But that mucilage is a prebiotic, so it's a food for your good bacteria in the gut. It makes the probiotics in your stomach, in your gut, grow. So you don't actually need a probiotics. You just need to eat madumbe. They are also lower in GI than amadumbe is lower in GI than sweet potatoes and potatoes, and it's also affordable. And you can, yes, the traditional way is to boil it, but you can play around with it and bake with it. You can make a stew and add cream and spring onions and make a delicious meal out of it. Then we have Imfino morojo, which is the wild leafy greens. They come in there's about 100 different edible species in South Africa. The most common one is amaranth. If you speak Setswana, it will be tepe, imbuya. We have leroto, which is the spider plant. We have the cowpea. The cowpea is the one that also produces beans that you can also, the black-eyed peas that you can also eat. Research has shown that these wild plants are higher in nutrients such as folate, calcium, iron, beta carotenes, and vitamin C than the spinach that we all love. And because they grow as weeds, they don't need any agricultural inputs. Everybody has them in their garden. Your gardener will pull them out, but for most of us, it's called food. So you don't need to plant them, you don't need to water them, and they will survive the hottest sun of Limpopo. And tomorrow morning, when you wake up, they are ready to be planted. And they are also drought resistant. The next category of foods that used to be available and it's also still available for our benefits is beans and lentils. The common ones are cowpeas. Cowpeas, like I said, also gives you the leaves that you eat. You have the sugar beans. The jugo beans are the bambara nuts and also the ground nuts. These are staples. They were not eaten occasionally. They were eaten every day for breakfast, lunch, and supper, because you will see that they will provide you with protein, iron, zinc, folate, and fiber, which the standard child needs, and also the malnourished, the obese and overweight parent in the home needs, because obesity is also a form of malnutrition. They are also low GI, and they're very versatile. You can use them in soups and salads, and also I use them in baking. Like when I make brownies, I use black beans instead of using flour. And they are also shelf stable. They don't need refrigeration. You can keep them for many years. They are affordable. Even if you boil them and they're ready to cook, you can easily freeze them for up to a month so that they are ready to use when you get home. Dairy. In most African countries, dairy is consumed as fermented milk because there was no refrigeration, but it's also a form of food preservation. Fermentation is one of the oldest food preservation method, but the other benefit is most Africans and some of the Europeans are lactose intolerant as they grow older, meaning that they don't produce the lactase, which is the enzyme that digests the lactose, which is the milk. So it's the nutrition that our grandmothers knew without studying a BSc in dietetics. By preserving fermented milk into sour milk, inkomase, madila, whatever you call it, amasi, if you produce live probiotic cultures that are good for gut and metabolic health. Like I said, it is lower in lactose and improves the taste, which gives you a sour tart taste, which actually is the Southern African taste preference. This is what most of our food tastes like. What we have as sugar, salt, and sweetness is what the food industry has brought from Europe. It's nothing to do with what our ancestors used to eat. On the picture there, it is yogurt, not the legal word yogurt, that are made using Milo. I don't know what it is in English. It's a medlar something. It is a wild plant, a wild fruits, and if you notice, all of the fruits that we have in Southern Africa that are indigenous are sour. We don't have any sweet fruits. So the old people used to put this medlar, which is Milo, or also use sumac and or other fruits, and put them into milk. And they will, in 2 days' time, they kettle and they make yogurt. It is so nice. It's better than the strawberry yogurt that you get from Pick n Pay. So we've always had these kind of food. They've just been pushed to the side, and we made to believe that we never had a healthy, nutritious diet that our ancestors ate for many years. Some of the other foods, I'm not saying that we didn't have meat. We have cows, but we use them as currency. We just didn't slaughter a cow and eat meat every day. We had a variety of proteins, and some of them are umuleqwa, which is the proper free-range chicken, not the one that you find in the store, the one that the bones you can't chew, the one that had a good life, and it dug for worms and it ran around and lived a happy life. And some of the proteins that we had was insects. The most common one is mopane worms, and you will see that mopane worms is higher in protein and also higher in iron than your expensive piece of steak. It's high in zinc and also B vitamin. And also insects like locusts and the different types like dinqa that come after it rained, they are sustainable because they don't need water, they don't need land, they don't produce greenhouse emissions. So these are the type of foods that we should be looking at if you are thinking about the future diet that is good for the planet and also good for us as people. This is one of the quotes that I had when I wrote my book, Eating. When a grandmother was talking to me, I was interviewing her because I like talking to old people. They teach me more than what my diet degree has ever taught me. And she said, when I was a child, we used to pick wild fruits. We grew everything that we needed. We had groundnuts, we had legumes and sorghum. She actually told me the day that she remembers the day that she was introduced to maize meal. And it was something strange after their land was repossessed. She didn't know what to do with it, but because they had no choice, that they didn't have land anymore, they had to now start eating maize meal. But she remembered distinctly the day that, that swap had to be made. She tells me that she had waste not approach, which now the chefs are saying they eat nose to tail. Nose to tail is nothing new. Africans have been doing nose to tail. When we have a pumpkin, we eat the pumpkin skin, we eat the pumpkin seeds inside, we eat the pumpkin flesh, we eat the pumpkin leaves, we eat everything. We don't throw anything away. That is actually sustainable. We don't have a word sustainable in any of the African languages because we've been doing it for many years. She says we didn't know that what we're doing was healthy. We just did things the way that we did. It was just normal. So it's always been there. Now we're going to move to the section about land, climate, and also cultural invention. I want to show you how our food system was eroded layer by layer, just in summary. Our foods had ecological precision. We had something called the Three Sisters, which I will explain in this next slide. Where they planted, if I could actually go to it. This is the Three Sisters. It's done in South America, but we also did it in Africa. So the picture that I could find was with maize meal. So think about it. You have the long stalk of maize, not maize. Let's do sorghum and millet. Then it's growing long. Then you plant the beans, any of the cowpeas, and the cowpeas are going to whatever, tie themselves around the stalk so they can grow longer. You don't need wires. Then what happens is then you grow the butternut and the squash and the different types of what do you call them? The squash families, and also the yellow one, the gamma melon. You grow them on the ground. They act as ground cover. What you have is a system that actually produces higher nutrients than if these foods were produced separately. It's more sustainable because it prevents soil erosion. It also makes sure that you don't need, there's no loss of water through evaporation because the ground is covered. But if you look at this, you actually have a full meal. You have sorghum or you have millet as a grain. Then you have the butternut squash on the side. You take the butternut squash, the seeds, you grind them into a butter, like you have peanut butter, which actually gives you protein, it gives you essential fats and some of the vitamins. Then you cook the beans, which actually will give you protein. It also gives you extra fiber, vitamins, minerals, and it's also low GI. So a vegan meal is something that our grandmothers and our grandfathers did every day. It's not something that is new, then everybody is being vegan. We had sustainable methods without calling them sustainable. So this method helped because sorghum will survive the rainfalls like we're having now. It's never gonna, fall down and have diseases like you'd have with corn. And it's also drought tolerant. If it dries, sorghum and millet will survive. And the legumes that were planted will actually help to fix the atmospheric nitrogen, and also the soil nitrogen. And you had amadumbe, which would help to, which ideal because they survived the humid coastal areas of KZN and Eastern Cape. You had the leafy green vegetables, which were eaten, every day. They put peanuts into them. You cook them with milk. You put tomatoes and onion. There's a variety way of cooking them. And you had fruits that grew wild, and none of the fruits, like I said, were sweet. So we always say, oh, fruits are not healthy because they're high in fructose. Our fruits are not sweet. So we have nothing to complain about. But then comes maize meal, which is an apartheid economic project. And because it was used as feeding animals and also to produce petrochemicals when South Africa was under embargo for not receiving fuel and the waste product. So what happens is that the fiber that is in the maize and the endosperm that has the vitamin E, the essential fats, the proteins, and the B vitamins are used as animal feed. And the waste material, which we call as our heritage food, maize meal, that we're going to celebrate on Heritage Day, as a waste product that was not even good enough to be given to animals, was used as a staple food for Black people. So these are questions that we need to ask. These are things that we need to shift. These are things that we need to advocate, that they need to come back, because the system as it is not working, and we have solutions on our footsteps. Because when we talk about sustainability, you talk about the 3 Ps. You talk about the planet, saying reduce the greenhouse emissions. You talk about people, us, we need to get good nutrition out of the food, and also the profit for the companies. No company is gonna start operating tomorrow and say we are operating to make South Africans healthy. Companies operate to benefit their shareholders and to make money, but all of these 3 things can coexist at the same time. None is more important than the other. So that's how I view sustainability. And it's something that is not new, that we've done it, and you see it in African models of farming and food production. Now, let's talk about the structural systems that dismantled our food system. The 1913 Native Land Act that took away land from Africans. About 70% of the people in South Africa, which were Black people, were confined to about 13% of the land, which is not equitable. This outlawed Black land ownership near the cities, making sure that it's too far. You don't have the land. Now you need to start having to go to Pick n Pay and Checkers to buy food, but it's too far away and there's no means of transport. And also, even if there is means of transport, it costs more to go and buy food. This is where the start of malnutrition, which is under and over nutrition, starts to be cultivated. Then you start with the mining industries, which actually dismantled the structures of families. What they did is that they took the strongest people in the families, which were young men, and they took them to the mining or to mine gold, like in Gauteng. And they left, for those people who still had the land, you left the grandmother with, grandchildren and a mother, Makoti, the wife to look after a farm, a big land. They're not gonna be able to farm where, like when the men of the home were there. But these men were put in hostels, and they were fed refined maize meal, which, like I said, was waste product from after feeding the animals with nutritious parts of the grains. And this maize meal was refined. There was no nutritional value in the maize meal, and there was no form of protein and other nutrients to complement the diet of these men. And it ended up, being one of the root causes of the diseases that we see, because then we're talking about genetics and epigenetics, these things do get passed on to the next generations. So the black starches that was introduced then, became an urban template of what urban South Africans need to see as their staple diet every day, because there's no land, it is cheaper, it's available, and there's no other option. But also because now you're needing to start to work, you do realize that you need 2 taxis to get home. And if you think back, the African way of cooking is you wake up in a home, you light the fire, and in an African home, to say that there is life in this home, but you're not going to light the fire and not put the pot in there. You're going to cook something like dikgobe, which is sorghum with a lentil and a bean, or you're going to cook your chicken and slow cook it, because the hard body takes many hours to cook. There's going to be something on the fire, then you go to work in the fields, then you come back at lunch. That food that is slow, the taste of a good chicken, the proper free range, it tastes much better than the chicken that we cook in 30 minutes time. That food had flavor. It just needed salt. You didn't need spices on packet soup. But because now you commute long hours, you get home at 7 o'clock and the children want food that is very quick. This is where the industry of packet soup started making way into our kitchen, because there's no flavor in food that is cooked very quickly. I look at people who are using the packet soup, is that they want taste in their foods, and you want taste very fast, versus somebody who has the time to cook food slower with more care and more time. But the other thing is you're removing women to go work as domestic workers. These women are holders of seed knowledge. Older women have taught me a lot about food, but they don't have the time to pass down the knowledge, because our knowledge is not written. Our knowledge is passed as stories, as watching, as listening. So we lost that connection between, our grandparents' knowledge and what we see as available knowledge. And some of yes, you understand that there was the framing by, the apartheid government saying to people who still had a little bit of the land, to them saying that don't plant the food that you are used to, plant the foods that you see in the cities, because if you continue planting your traditional food, you'll become poor. This is where the word poverty food comes from, that we now started seeing our foods that, because it's not going to give us economic benefit, it's going to make us poor, then we called it poverty foods. Then we have generations that are grown, like I said, without any traditional knowledge. Traditional food for me is knowing about who I am. And by losing all of this information, we're losing something that is actually beneficial for our public health. You hear some of the people saying some of the foods that it invites poverty into their home. Like, people view amasi, because it was associated with living in the rural areas, as something that means poverty. Now, because now you live in Sandton, you want strawberry yogurt, but you don't understand that. So the amasi that you are passing, it's actually more superior than the strawberry yogurt, because strawberry yogurt is full of sugar. So it's the reframing that we need to start talking to our patients about, to make them realize that, there was a structure that made you see this food the way that you see them, give them a different lens on how to view these foods. Now let's talk about the economic structures of how eating well is actually more expensive in South Africa. Oh, sorry. if you look at the food environment in South Africa, it costs more to eat healthy. I always listen to the people who are doing their healthy basket. I think they come from Pietermaritzburg, and you see every month that it gets more and more expensive to actually afford the basics of a healthy diet for a family. Most people who are poor, who are mostly affected by obesity, live in the rural areas, and they shop in the spaza shops. But if you walk into a spaza shop, it's actually more expensive to buy fresh vegetables and fruits per kg than if you go to the stores in the market. But you also see that the spaza shops don't keep a lot of the fresh foods or the foods that we think are more healthy. They are choosing food that is shelf stable. Some of them don't even have refrigerators. Some of the foods that they are selling are calorie dense, like sparkle, amagwenya, the fat cooks. They are nutrient poor, but it's actually for survival. They're thinking about filling up the stomach. They're not thinking about, I need to meet the RDAs of vitamins and minerals. And even if the child support grant and the SDR grant are spent on food, it's not easy for them to access the foods that we would want them to access. What they have is what's available in the stores, and they don't have much of a choice. And the consequence then becomes there is food insecurity, and this then leads, it stresses you, and we know stress increases your cortisol levels, and it also contributes to the visceral fats, which is also the root cause of the non-communicable diseases that we talk about. But also at the same time, we do understand that if that money is not gonna help you to reach the end of the month, they do experience the times of famine. So that famine and feast that happens in the same family, actually sometimes, multiple times in a month, because they eat depending on how much money that they have. It also then contributes to the adaptive fat storage mechanisms, where you realize that the patient is not eating a lot of food, but they keep on storing fat, and it's not easy for them to lose weight. And in homes where there is food insecurities, there's been studies that are showing that when there's a lot of food available, people will binge eat. There is a lot of emotional eating that we don't actually associate with people who are poorer. And there is appetite dysregulation, because they thinking, I need to eat now in case the next time when it's lunchtime, then I don't have food. They're not eating based on I'm hungry. And even if they are full and there's still half of the food left in the plate, they finish the food because they don't know when the next meal is coming. So these are things that we need to be aware of, that it's not that they eat a high calorie dense food throughout the month. There are these cycles of they binge eat, there's emotional eating, they are more stressed. So that contributes to the whole picture of how they look like, their clinical picture. And the sad part is, because our government is not doing much to help us, that our food companies like Tiger Brands, Pioneer Foods, and the RCL Foods, they are not thinking about the quality of the diet that of the foods that they are. Yes, the quality in terms of hygiene, yes, we had the Paloni thing. It's top tier, but they're not thinking about the nutritional quality when they decide on the foods that they are going to produce. They produce Palonis, which is 8 rand at a spaza shop. The chips are like 30 cents, and you buy an ice pop. If you have little money, these are the stuff that you are going to choose because there's nothing else. You are not going to be thinking about, I want low GI, I want to be thinking about meeting my fiber needs, I need to be thinking about my vitamin C. So the food industry is also contributing. And the foods that they sell in the lower economic stores don't tend to be the same that, that they sell in areas of a higher economic status. Then let's talk about something that I've noticed when it comes to South African dietary guidelines. South Africa is, I think, the first country that had the South African food-based dietary guidelines in Southern Africa. the food-based dietary guidelines are per country. So I think the first one in South Africa says eat a variety of foods, and it says drink milk every day, and it says make starchy foods your basis of your meal. But our dietary guidelines in South Africa are saying that eat beans and legumes regularly. But I think that we need to change our South African food-based dietary guidelines and say that eat beans every day. Because like I said before, beans are affordable, they are high in nutrients, they're easy to store even if you don't have a refrigerator, and they last many years. And you cook them and you freeze them, and they're gonna be available to fill the nutrient gaps of proteins, iron, zinc, and folate and fiber when the family needs them. We need to be saying to South Africans, eat beans every day. Like I eat beans lunch and supper almost every day. I think about almost every day there's a bean, half a cup of beans that I eat. They provide these nutrients, and they're much more cheaper than nuts and seeds and fresh produce. And they do have polyphenols because they come in different colors, and they do contribute to a healthy microbiome and a healthy body. So it's to be saying, I know a lot of South Africans think of them as poverty foods, but we need to present a picture of their nutritional profile to the patients and explain to them that I'm not recommending them to you because I'm thinking that you are poor. We need to be seeing them as nutritional medicine, that it needs to be eaten daily. If you compare them price, per price and per nutrition to fruits and vegetables, they give you much more nutrients per rand than the fruits and vegetables do cost you. And you don't need to get in a taxi if you buy them in 5 kgs, or you can even easily plant them at home and store them, than saying eat 5 fruits and vegetables, which a lot of people struggle with. So consider saying to people, eat beans and legumes every day. You can, if you don't have recipes, I have hundreds of them, but you can find online easier recipes for them to use the beans with. Then the fifth section is going to be on South African food policy. What are the guidelines saying, and has the system failed? I think we can do much better. In 2018, we introduced the health promotion levy, where we were taxing sugar sweetened beverages. This actually helped to reduce the intake of sugar sweetened beverages, especially in lower income areas. And we also have good wins that, like I said, we're the first country to have the South African food-based dietary guidelines. It does need an update, because if you look at the South African food-based dietary guidelines of Namibia and Zambia, they're saying eat beans every day. And Namibia is a desert. They're not saying drink milk every day. South Africa says drink milk every day. They want us to drink 2 cups of milk. Who can afford it? Most of us are lactose intolerant. It's not easy to store. You can get those nutrients from beans. It's cheaper. It's much more affordable. Those little yogurts, the 20 ml thing, those sugar things need to get out of the shops. And we need to reframe. I know they will say children need calcium, beans have calcium and nutrients that we all need. So look at what other countries are doing. Nobody's saying don't drink milk, don't eat fruits and veg, but beans can help us fill the gaps that we are seeing. The other part where I see that we have failed is on VAT. We in South Africa, we pay VAT for sorghum, which is an indigenous product, which is much more superior in nutrition compared to maize meal. I remember around 2018, I was interviewed by one of the panel members who were advocating for sorghum to be included in the list of foods that VAT exempt, and we're still waiting. I was actually talking to one of the profs last week, and I don't know what's going on. We still, asking, even the Sorghum Trust has been asking that, can we include sorghum in that? Because even if you're gonna say to people, eat sorghum, 10 kgs of maize meal is around 110 rands per 10 kg. So not per kg, I'm sorry, it's 10 kg. Then 10 kg of sorghum is 210 kilogram, 10 kg, yes. my math. So this is about policy. You're not getting if you compare a table of nutritional qualities of sorghum and millet, and no, sorghum and maize meal, you will see that they're like black and white. Yes, sorghum is more expensive because of economies of scale. We plant way more maize meal than we do of sorghum. I come from Rustenburg, so I used to be a medical rep. So if you drive from Northwest to Derby, Ventersdorp or Colini, all the way until you get to Swartreneke, there's a lot of maize meal farms, like there's most mealies everywhere. So it makes sense. But you also need to understand that during the apartheid area, where the foundation was laid for all of these farmers, is that they were given our land as free, but they were also assisted. There were subsidies that were given. South Africa doesn't give subsidies anymore. They were subsidized to produce the maize meal because the government needed it as animal feed, as petrol, and the waste of it was going to be given as our staple food. So these are the things that you need to think about. For people who can afford to buy sorghum, please encourage them to. I do understand the price difference is huge. It's like almost double, but the more we consume it, maybe the better it's going to get. And hopefully the next time they're going to start working on this vet issue, then it's going to be a little bit much more cheaper, but more people are eating maize, so it makes economic sense. If you are a producer of maize meal than somebody who produces sorghum, because sometimes you look at it as a labor of love. Then the sugar levy. Yes, we introduced it, and we said we have seen the reduction in the consumption of sugar sweetened drink, but I'm not the only one. We should have extended it to other ultra-processed foods. We've been working on the front of pack nutrition labeling for many years. We're still waiting. And also our policy needs to be pro-indigenous foods. They are what a majority of South Africans like, sorghum, millet, legumes, and morogo. Once in a while, you'll find morogo in a Spar. One of the other years, Woolies was selling amaranth, like tepe, which we're excited in December, and it went on for like a week, and it went away. These foods are not, morogo is not easy to store like it is for spinach. We understand those, like I've worked with producers, it's not gonna last 2 days, like spinach is gonna, and broccoli is gonna last in the store, but we need to be doing research and finding out easier way to make these foods available. And we had the issues about spaza shop with children dying. It's a public health emergency, but I don't see the same levels of response that are given to these issues that we have in the towns. And this is where the majority of people highly affected by obesity and non-communicable diseases are, and they don't have much of a choice than somebody who does have the funds to actually make their way out of that obesity and other related conditions part. Now let's talk about trade, power, and structured food availability. To explain to you that we don't choose foods from a neutral food environment. There are powers that are deciding what's on your plate. You tend to think that I went to the store and I decided to buy this. No, you didn't decide. There are people who are deciding behind computers what you're going to eat. It's not your choice completely. South Africa, even Africa, we import a lot of grains into the continent. Some of the papers are saying about 30%, which makes us more vulnerable to, issues like Ukraine conflicts, where you will see that the price of oil is going to go up, and the wheat prices went up because Ukraine produced quite a lot of wheat to feed most of the world, but your wages don't go up as the price of oil and wheat is going up. I mean, now they're bombing Iran. Everybody's concerned about the price of oil going up. So we're going to see the prices going up, but you never see them going down. Like South Africa, wheat is one of our staple foods that we import about 50% because we cannot meet the demand. So what happens in other countries affects what you put on your plate and the cost of food. You're not actually affected by what happens in South Africa. And EU and the US do highly subsidize their farming and also their food production industry. We don't. And when they do have surplus, because they can produce and the government say, produce what you want, we guarantee you that we're going to buy it. When they have access, they come in and dump it here. They dump it here, meaning they're going to sell it at a lower price than what the farmers in South Africa are selling it for. That means the farmer doesn't get his money back, or sometimes they have to dump quite a lot of food, meaning that they don't have money to plan for the next season. So these issues, although the World Trade Organization are saying that they are method to prevent, they still happen. They do affect the price of foods. And these are things that we don't tend to think about when we're thinking about the price of food is going up. And, you know, like in South Africa, you have these big three companies that are actually dominating the distribution of foods, that it looks like a monopoly. You don't have, you know, much more choice. And they also tend to sell the same thing, that there is no variety between them. So you can't say this one is better than the other. I see them doing, sometimes I think it's one company. I don't even think that, you know, we have 3 or 4 companies. They look the same. They're producing exactly the same thing. And when they produce these foods, none of them are saying, let's look at sorghum. You know, the quality of sorghum from one of the brands that I ate as a child, it has declined. It looks quite bad. Sometimes you're thinking, was this animal food? You know, they're not even thinking, these are, you know, South Africans are about 80% of the country. Can we make an effort to give them indigenous foods? Can we do research? They have the money. Can we, instead of giving us sweet flavored yogurt, which is a French product, can we give them something that is sour, that is more according to their taste preference? There isn't much research. Government is not doing anything about it. So we, on our own. Then you have these ultra processed foods, then they will always say that they are good for shelf life, and which, yes, they are, which benefits the companies because there's going to be very little loss. But there is sugar, fat, and salt. They habit forming. They're not according to our taste preference. One of the other issues that I tend to look at is the quotas alimentarias, because I work with food producers, so rural women who produce indigenous foods, and they're looking at ways to process them so they can sell them in the stores. A lot of them are doing quite good work, although they don't have much bigger volumes. But the standards for producing the foods, like for the health standards and also the production standards, are quite high, that it's a barrier for many of the traditional foods that we have. Like I said, morogo, you know, you pick it today, tomorrow it wilts. It's not as stable as spinach is. Maybe spinach is stable because there's been years of research and money put into making it much more stable. So it's one of, you can't, so it makes it difficult also as the stores to keep these foods, because, you know, they're gonna go off very fast. So it's something that you need to get in the store and get it to be sold quicker. But it's much more easier to produce ultra processed foods like palonis and sweets and biscuits and that. And it's easier for them to follow the quotas alimentarias standard than somebody in the rural areas who's trying to make sure that people in the cities do have access to these foods. So the patient's environment, just in summary, is not totally their choices. There are forces that are making them choose the foods the way that they do. The next section that we're going to look at is the global nutrition hierarchies. Why some diets travel and others don't. Let me say this, I am not bashing the Mediterranean diet. I'm just simply explaining why power and having resource and being lightly colored, like lacking melanin, will help you get your diet to be valued. So how the Mediterranean diet got to be the gold standard. Mediterranean diet was actually researched around the 1950s and 60s, when they noticed that the cardiovascular diseases were they researched the cardiovascular diseases in white men by Ansel Keys during the 7 country studies. And so 2 of the countries that were studied out of the 7 was Italy and Greek. They looked at their diet and they noticed that they had lower cardiovascular diseases than people like compared to other regions. What happens is that's where the Mediterranean diet was, the foundation was built for the Mediterranean diet. But what's actually interesting, let's look at this map. What's actually interesting, this is a picture of the Mediterranean area. It's about 22 countries. They looked at Italy, sorry, I couldn't color. They looked at Italy there on the top. And if you go down to your right-hand side, you will see Greece there. So they took 2 countries and made them to represent the whole of the Mediterranean area and said that's the Mediterranean diet. If you notice, these 2 countries that were chosen were white. None of the Northern African countries, sorry, like Morocco, Algeria, Libya, Egypt, your Lebanon, and were included in this whole framing of the Mediterranean diet, where even though these fell under Mediterranean countries. And the other thing to notice is that the Mediterranean diet said you need to lower your intake of meat, eat fruits, vegetables, dairy. They said low-fat dairy, whereas I've lived in Italy and traveled around Europe, there's no Italian grandmother or a Greek grandmother who's gonna have yogurt or cheese that is made out of fat-free milk. They will slap you. So it was not realistic. So, and even though these other countries that were not included actually had a lower intake of meat compared to Italy and Greece. Italy eats a lot of processed meat, which is linked to cancer, and it's also high in salt. And that's not part of the conversation that is had in the Mediterranean diet. So they said the white part correlated with health because the studies that were done were mostly by white Harvard men. It was updated, yes, because after criticism in 2011, and it was called the Simplified Mainframe for All Mediterranean Cultures. In the naming of the document, you will see that they name all the European countries like France, Spain, Italy, Greece as individually. They clump together the Middle Eastern countries because they're a little bit brown, and the more browner countries like the African countries, there's Algeria, there's Morocco, there's also Egypt, but they also only name Morocco. When they list the foods that are healthy, they don't talk about cassava, they don't talk about teff, but these foods are very healthy. Cassava is a root vegetable, teff is a grain, teff is a type of millet. It's eaten mostly in the Horn of Africa. They're not in a pyramid, but they also are nutritionally comparable to reduce cardiovascular diseases and all the other diseases. So it's this diet, when you look at it, it wasn't about the accuracy of the nutritional information. It was more about that you focus in the research based on who has the resources and who is seen as deserving of their diet to be researched. Okay, that's the map again. So they only mentioned Morocco, forgot about all the other countries, and it's then called Mediterranean diet. And even with the first version of it, it didn't have beans. And all the other African countries and also the Mediterranean countries, they eat beans and lentils every day. That's one of the changes that were added at the revision of the diet. You see that it's correlated with white men. There wasn't actually causal study the causal part of the studies were not what is it? The studies were not designed to look at the causes of the cardiovascular diseases. It was more nutritionism, which I will look at. You will see that when we talk about power, that there's institutional power. The researchers were affiliated with Harvard universities and also with people who were drawing up the US dietary guidelines. And after that, there wasn't any equivalent large-scale research on other cultures like Asian cultures, Middle Eastern, and also African cultures to look at if they have comparable nutritional profile. It was just left like that, like Mediterranean diet, the gold standard for many, many years. And you are in Africa, you've never seen this Mediterranean Sea, but you're told to be eating this diet to help you with your cardiovascular disease or obesity, which is not fair. Because the method that they use is called nutritionism. This is where you extract your desirable nutritional profile. So they said low saturated fat versus low saturated fat and also high unsaturated fat. And they then reconstructed a diet around it. It wasn't actually what the Mediterranean people were eating. Like I said, there's no low-fat cheeses in Greece and Italy. They eat a lot of processed meats, and there isn't beans and lentils like the profile says. So it wasn't realistic. It was just an extraction of this is the profile we need. Let's then take the foods and plant them and then decide this gold standard of a diet. But the familiar foods that were in the browner part of the Mediterranean areas were not included in the diet. But also, you need to see where money comes from. It was co-created by Old Ways. Old Ways, it's, I think it's a non-governmental organization. They do research on cultural diets, but they also focus on a lot of grains. So there's funding with Barilla. Barilla, it's Italian companies, they do pasta. We now have Barilla in South Africa. Kellogg's and Quaker Oats were part of the people who were funding. This is why the base of the original diet was grains. It wasn't about the culture. It was more about the power. When it was changed later on, then the beans and the lentils were added. But we also need to understand that if there's investments looking at the Mediterranean diet, yes, there's going to be nutritional for the people. It's going to improve some people's diet, but there are also social benefits. We all run to Italy to go eat the diet that looks like their pasta, their flag is white, green, and red. Then there are economic benefits. There's also environmental features because what is promoted is going to be grown. We now seeing that it's more seasonal, like as the diet keeps on being updated along the years. You see that it's more biodiverse, there's more variety. You also see that the Mediterranean diet was given a UNESCO heritage title. Now Italy is applying for heritage titles. So all of these things have downstream economic benefits. But we also need to think about, come together and saying, we're going to do a South African diet and also have a heritage badge on our diet. And it's going to help us economically and socially and economically. Just to show that this process of looking at Mediterranean diet as the gold standard wasn't to make it it's not that it is superior. It's because people who had resources studied it. And just because our diets have not been studied because we don't have the power, we don't have the resources, and we never invested the time, it doesn't mean that our diets are inferior. Research costs money. South Africa spends less than 1% of our GDP on research, which is higher than any other country in Africa. So we need to do a lot of work, but just to assure you that our grains, our legumes, our dairy, our leafy vegetables and tuber also do have protective benefits against non-communicable diseases, and they're worthy of being a gold standard diet for our people. So in clinical terms, I want to urge you to look at heritage-based dietary advice when a patient comes into your rooms, and also correct the assumptions that they make, because people will be thinking offal is bad. Offal has more nutrients than steak, that is more expensive. It has more minerals, it is healthy, it needs to be included in the diet. Yes, there are fatty parts that you can remove the parts, but it is not inferior. It's actually celebrated in most of the Michelin stars restaurant. And also realize that obesity is part of the story of whose diet knowledge has been legitimized and who has been erased. And I always say with my work that I don't want people to choose between health and culture. I think it's unfair. I need to value people's heritage and also include that as part of their culture. I'm not saying everything that our grandmothers did is perfect. They had some issues, but there are good things that we can include. And the last part is for you to use this knowledge in order to protect what we do have, is that as a public health strategy, we need to promote indigenous foods as a tool to lower the rates of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and hypertension, and also knowing that by protecting the indigenous knowledge that we do have, it's a public health investment. We need to see the economic benefits, because everybody's talking about Asian grains. Because if you think about gluten-free grains, they are all talking about indigenous African grains. It's sorghum, it's millet, it's teff, and it's fonio, and rice. But rice has methane issues, so we're going to leave it on the other side. But everybody's saying I'm gluten-free. They are talking about our foods. Everybody wants fermented foods. We've been fermenting before books were invented. And it is nutritional justice, but it's also part of the economic development, especially in the rural areas, that these people need to stay there in the rural areas and don't need to come to the cities to come and eat polony. And as part of Community Pride, I urge you to help remove this poverty food sticker. You know, now you see Morogo and Pick n Pay. Like I remember when Morogo was in Woolies, people were running to me. Did you see that? Oh, I'm excited. And they were paying money for it because it was in Woolies. It's fine. If you can afford it, do it. You see the dikgobe as a signature dish in a restaurant in Sandton, which is something that we celebrate. We also need to be thinking about UNESCO heritage, because I do think that we deserve it if we just work together and stop thinking about pap as our heritage food, because it upsets me. As dietitians and health professionals, I want you to think about yourself as a translator of nutrition, that you take nutritional science, that's cultural parts of the diet, and also see where they match with nutritional diet, thinking about protecting the nutritional knowledge, because this knowledge is under threat. But also when the government is saying, let's comment on food labeling, sugar levy, extending the sugar levy, and sorghum, removing VAT from sorghum, and nutrition policy, please take part. We do need more professional voices in these spaces. And as the last part, in your practice, just remember that to ask your client, where do they shop, how far it is, the budget that they have with when it comes to buying foods in the home, and who cooks. And also ask them, what did they eat as a child and they moved away from? You find that there's a lot of healthy, valuable foods that they did eat when they were children, but they sort of left them because they don't see them in the cities and in the stores. Like I remember when we published Eating, people used to say, you say I can eat tribe with my expensive bottle of wine and I'm not going to gain weight. And I said, yeah, you can. And say, you lying. And I'm like, I'm telling you. And I see that in my practice, people who eat indigenous foods, and they cheat a lot, they're much more happier, they lose weight, and they compliant, and they stick to their diet than me forcing them to eat broccoli. And even if, when you talk about these foods, say, Amasi has probiotic cultures, it's high in protein, it has calcium, it has minerals, because we need to see those labels attached to our foods than only saying spinach has vitamin C and calcium. We need to take these health labels and attach them to our food so that they can also be on the same level. Legumes as a daily prescription. If you want recipes, ask me. And also, a lot of my clients come to me to lose weight, not for health reasons. They want to lose weight to fit into their skinny jeans. Or to go to the beach in December, but focus on, you're gonna have a lot of energy, glucose stability, BP, you're gonna sleep better, your joints are gonna move much more better. So these are the conversations that they need to understand, that it's about how they feel. Yes, looking good is, everybody wants to look good, but how they feel is also important. And as the last part, the structural parts that are getting your patient to be obese is land dispossession, the migrant labor that we still have even today, like the township food desert, the climate stress that we experience in South Africa, the trade structures and the policies that are failing are contributing. Yes, the individual contributes because of the unhealthy diet, with physical inactivity, chronic stress also needs to be, you need to talk about it. You need to talk about poor sleeps. Genetics also play a role, but not all the time. And also the microbiome, the health of their gut also is an individual thing. So these are the topics that need to be discussed, but also at the back of your mind, think about the structure that got them to be here. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't depress you.
No. Colleagues, can we all just give Mpho some hearts and some love? Wow. I've been schooled tonight. I've really, thank you for such an awesome talk, Mpho. There's so much that you've shared with us tonight around the diets that we've actually come from, and taking us back to, I remember when I was very, very small, we had a chicken coop at home.
Oh,
and
lovely.
when we wanted to eat chicken, Daddy went to the back and killed the chicken for us. And so taking us back to the fact that we actually had fruit trees and all of these things in our yard. One of the things that Philippe said early on, which also struck a chord with me when you showed the picture of Lerato, and you asked, what are you thinking about when you are looking at Lerato? And Philippe said, the system is forcing her not to have time to cook.
Yes.
And you touched on that so amazingly, which is why these ultra processed and high GI, low satiety foods are becoming such a fad for our younger population. Then I'm thinking about the economics of eating badly. The feast, famine, food insecurity cycles that clients are going through, and the policy shifts. Honestly, I really want to thank you, because a lot of what you've shared tonight, I was just thinking also back to 2022, when we had the floods, firstly in KZN, and then we had those riots, and malls were destroyed, and we had a problem with food at the time. And then understanding what we can do as healthcare providers. So for myself personally, I just wanted to know a lot of what you shared, especially as you went through some of those indigenous foods that are available. Where's the best place for us to be able to get more information so that we can speak confidently about what you've just shared tonight around these heritage indigenous foods that you've spoken to us about?
There's no book. What I did after I finished my second book, I've been doing an encyclopedia of indigenous foods for a while. Now I'm because I have the time now, I'm more concentrating on it. So I took all the grains. I did Southern Africa. I did the grains, the legumes, the vegetables, the fruits, and I'm interested in agriculture also. Where do they grow? How do the climate, the nutrition? I want recipes. I want the old ones and the new ones. Because if you look at my book, my first book, Eating, it shows grandmothers dikgobe. So dikgobe is sorghum or millet with beans and legumes, beans and lentils, which grandmother only had salt. Unless you lived in KZN, you didn't have spices. So some of us, we didn't grow up much with spices. This is why the chicken spices and the barbecues, which are high in salt, is is popular. So what we did with that, if you have the copy of Eating, you will see that on the next page, on the side page, we made the same dikgobe, but then we added a vinaigrette and olives and radishes, and because these are the tastes that people like. So South African like Nando's, peri peri, and aromat. They put aromat in their pocket to go to a funeral. So I then look at those flavors and I translate them into healthier foods. So I don't know what I'm gonna do because it's quite thick. Like when I wrote my second book, I had 500 pages. My publisher told me I'm insane. It had to be half. So I'm thinking of putting it online as a free resource. But if you want to ask me questions, you can. I have this resource. It just needs to be finished, polished, and just published. I have quite a lot of work done on indigenous foods.
Oh, awesome, awesome. And I know that there was also a comment that you should be opening a restaurant.
Oh, hell no. Oh, hell no. I am not selling food. No, oh no. I work with communities that produce foods, and we look at marketing and telling the stories and packaging them and whatever. And I'm like, wow, no, go to the market. I'm not selling. I will help you with recipes, but I'm not selling food.
And so I just want to go quickly to some of our questions, but before I go to the questions, we just want to just acknowledge all of the colleagues that have just said thank you for such a good presentation, that it's a fascinating approach to obesity, that it's been very informative, I think even for myself really tonight. We've got Anonymous who's asking, what is the benefit of mabele brown pap versus maize meal white pap?
Okay, the brown pap from Pretoria. So I was fortunate enough to grow up in a home that only said sorghum. I never ate maize meal, thank God for my mother. It is low GI, it's high in polyphenol. So if you look at a structure of a grain, the grain has the fiber outside, the fiber. We've all eaten corn on the cob and you didn't buy it well and you left that yellow thing at the bottom, remember, that is the endosperm. That's where the vitamin E and essential fats are. Then you have the fiber outside and you also have the proteins. That part is in maize meal is used as animal feed. The white part inside the starch, which is just starch with nothing much, which is a waste product from animal feeding, is called pap, as a staple food for Black people. Sorghum is whole. So it has the endosperm, it has the fiber, even if it's ground, it's still very, very high in fiber. It has the polyphenols that are the same as your red wine, which is another story. And also the blueberries. It is high in vitamins and minerals. Also, sorghum, when you ferment, it needs to be fermented because by fermenting it, you're making the protein easy to digest and absorb, and also the vitamins and minerals. The other thing that I'm going to say last, I hate maize meal. Everybody knows that, I'm not making it a secret. Maize meal comes from South America. When Columbus pretended to discover the world and brought it around the world, he didn't take the indigenous knowledge of processing maize meal. He just said, we'll use machines or whatever. But in Mesoamerica, so maize meal is soaked in ash. They nixtamalized it, making the B vitamins and to be easily available, making it easy to digest so that the nutrients are available in the body. The rest of us who are eating maize meal around the world, we are not processing it according to the indigenous way, like the people who God gave maize meal, because God didn't give us maize meal. So we are not benefiting from the nutrients, but we are eating it as an empty, it's like you're eating sugar. Then our government says they are fortifying, which is another topic.
Wow.
So yeah, I can go on about maize meal.
And so, we've got one or two other questions that I just want to ask from the colleagues who've asked here. It is, because I can see, Dr. Mabele, you must just give us an eye on time. We've got 2 minutes left.
Maybe let's take it until 8:05. Colleagues, we'll take questions until 8:05. Then we'll try to wrap up. So maybe also short, direct answers, and yeah, so we can take maybe 3 or 4 questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there a nutritional difference between the coarse and fine mabela, and how best can one do that?
I don't see, I've looked at several brands. I don't see much of a difference. Some of the fine mabela is higher in fiber. So it depends on the brand. But it's still way higher in fiber than you get in maize meal. So compare the packaging.
Compare the packaging. Then how do canned foods, example, beans and frozen foods or veggies, compare to fresh foods, especially when advising our clients?
Canned foods and frozen vegetables are part of a healthy diet. Some of them actually have higher nutrients than fresh foods, as long as it's not dipped in sugar and salt and the other stuff that is unhealthy. So if it's corn for corn is the same, they're healthy, not canned peaches.
Okay. And then
frozen herb. Yeah.
And then Lynette is asking, how does one adapt or go back to this way of eating and nutritional approach when dealing with issues of polypharmacy and insulin resistance, being the intersection between HIV, aging, and comorbidities? I think in my mind, I was also wondering at the back of it is that what practical strategies have you seen at a community level to help that have helped to shift the dietary patterns when we have economic challenges like Lerato, you know, that you saw there, who may also not, and you spoke about that healthy basket.
For me, I see it with a lot of my patients. Like I said, I get better compliance. I'm reminding them of home, of love, of good times. And it's easier. And in the communities, people have morojo, but they don't know how to integrate it. It's not written in diet books. It's not in the clinic programs. So they shy away from mentioning it, even if you're asking a diet history. So ask them about the foods. That's why I said, ask them, will tell you. And all of these foods can work for HIV, for obesity, for TB, for all of the other conditions. It's not only yes, we're talking about obesity, but healthy diet. They can work health-wise for all the other diseases.
And so Muziwake is asking, how do we ferment sorghum?
Can you email me? I'll explain it to you. It's a long process.
It's a long process.
It's not like sourdough, but for time, I'll email me, I will do it. It's very easy. Like I fermented yesterday in the morning, it was done. It's very easy. I'll give you recipes. And in both my books, I do help people ferment, but I will explain it to you.
Yeah, let me just say I've posted our email. So for those who need specific questions, just send them to info@clinicalcareplatform.com and we will CC Paul and yourself, and then she can then reply to you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
And we've got Ben who's asking white sugar versus brown sugar bits.
There's not much of a difference. A teaspoon of sugar and a white brown is the same. Please don't start using sweeteners. Reduce the amount of sugar that you are taking. But there's no difference with the brown sugar and honey.
Really?
No.
Wow.
I'm busy laughing.
That's news for me.
I was just taking
tea
and
I learned
for
something
my
new.
Honey has polyphenols.
Just said he's going to take honey today.
No, stop. Send your money to me. Honey has polyphenols, very few, yes, and which are good, but the benefits don't. You can get those polyphenols from other foods. You can eat sorghum and you'll be fine and live forever.
And you know, when you were speaking about the Mediterranean diet, right, and the fact that, you know, we've got all of these other African countries that are within that Mediterranean that were never ever featured within the articles. From your understanding, you know, I was just looking at the different tools that you had. What lessons can we learn from these African countries in that Mediterranean region?
They eat beans every day. They use a lot of spices and herbs. Like when I cook, I think I always pretend like my grandmother is Moroccan. I've never met her, but I cook like a Moroccan. Spices and herbs have a lot of health benefits to the gut. They're also medicinal, although they haven't been treated, but those are old wives' tale, but they seems to work. So you see that they consume very little meat, not very little, but less, but they also use fermented dairy like we do. So that's what you can learn.
Well, thank you so much, Mpho. Thank you for a really, really interesting and a great presentation. Truly showing us.
No,
I beg your pardon?
I forgot to take my charger, but it's fine. We're finishing.
What I would like for you to do is, what are your parting remarks to our CCP platform members today? And we also will be posting where people can get your books, because people want to know where they can get your books. Lesego, there's 2 raised hands. I'm not sure.
Yeah, we usually don't take live questions.
Okay.
All bookstores, my battery's gonna die. All bookstores, but also I think find an older person, speak to your mother, speak to your uncle, when I say grandmother, even the neighbor's grandmother is your grandmother. Ask them about indigenous foods. You will learn a lot. And ask them questions, they will teach you a lot. I learned more from older people than I did with my degree.
Because they are not in those books. They are not in the textbooks. So,
no, they're not.
Yeah, colleagues, I really enjoyed this. Rochelle, thank you so much. You are such a natural. I'm so happy. And as always, this is your home. You are welcome. Please do come back again and again. And maybe we should have a CCP bookstore, because many people come here, they tell us about their books. Maybe we should have we should see what we can do for the health workers. And my release says, okay, the names of the books before your network goes, the 2 books, quickly, just the names.
Your health starts in your gut.
Okay, your health.
If you Google my name, in your gut.
Yeah, your health starts in your gut.
Each thing is only available as an ebook because it's old.
Okay, we'll talk.
If you go to Take a Lot and put my name, you'll find it, and it's on special and Take a Lot and Loot.
We'll make it more on special here at CCP. More special. All right. Thank you so much, Rochelle. I loved it. I didn't even have to do
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Sharp, guys. If you're not a member of the platform, Rochelle has typed for you guys. Go for gold, and Mpho has also typed. From my side, do support the platform, join the membership. If you are a member, I know you are very happy that you made the right choice. On that note, night, everyone. Bye.
Good evening and welcome to our seminar in nutrition and dietetics, food, power and obesity, an African lens. We're truly pleased to have you joining us for what promises to be an important and thought-provoking conversation. Obesity is often framed as an issue of individual responsibility, but across African contexts, we know the story is far more complex. Food choices are shaped by social realities, economic constraints, political systems, and deeply rooted inequalities. Tonight, we'll critically explore the power dynamics within food production and distribution, reflect on how inequality influences dietary patterns, and examine what culturally relevant, community-informed, and sustainable approaches to obesity prevention truly look like. As healthcare professionals and leaders, our role extends beyond the clinic. It includes advocacy, contextual understanding, and meaningful engagement with the communities we serve.